Hello again, St. Francis. It's really good to meet with you and to wrestle with these issues that Henry Nouwen has been throwing around in his book. As somebody I once knew said, it's done my mind in, trying to wrestle with the paradox of what the world is saying and what God is saying and what Jesus is saying to us. To try and match the two, or leave the world and follow Jesus with my entire heart. It's very difficult. And so this morning we're going to look at theological reflection. This is the discipline that Henry Nouwen suggests we use to move away from our need and the temptation to be powerful. Theological reflection. Mm-hmm. And he defines theological reflection as reflecting on the painful and joyful realities of the everyday, but with the mind of Jesus, and thereby raising human consciousness to the knowledge of God's gentle guidance. It's a hard discipline, he acknowledges, since God's presence is often a hidden presence, a presence that needs to be discovered. So theological reflection, reflecting on the painful and joyful realities of every day with the mind of Jesus, thereby raising human consciousness to the knowledge of God's gentle guidance. It's a hard discipline, since God's presence is often a hidden presence, a presence that needs to be discussed. Father Meshach, how do we find God's presence?
Greetings, folks. It's at such a point where I think being closer to the door like this, I might just go that way, and you'll see to finish how you go with the interview. But it's quite interesting, and I love this kind of interactions. God does not give us things on a silver platter, and they're not so much in plain sight where we can say we move from here to there and 1 + 1 is 2. It needs a bit of a journey of discovery, which would of course include prayer and a study of scripture to a certain point, and this not from an academic perspective, but from engaging the heart, so that we can be able to tap into this. And I think that's where Henry comes in when he defines this theological reflection as being able to reflect on the painful and joyful realities of everyday life with the mind of Jesus. And that is key. Sometimes when we think of this, when we even want to engage, we may overlook these everyday realities that may seem like the landscape of life. And he says we need to go back there and touch base with it, because therein is the presence of God. And the ordinary things, the simple things, that's where we find this. I'm going to paraphrase, but Mother Teresa once said something to that effect, as to how we manifest or how do we bring out God's presence to others. It's by simple acts of kindness and things that we do to the others, as simple as a smile. That would brighten a person's day. And those simple things, those small things, that's where and that's how God is manifested, and God's presence to people in everyday life. It's those painful and joyful realities of everyday situation where we go into, because that's what Jesus did. He went to where people were and engaged with people as they were. Yesterday we read the Gospel of John, where Jesus, no, on Tuesday, sorry, where Jesus engages with that fellow at the pool of Bethesda. And he asks him, what can I do for you? Or what is your greatest need? And this man speaks from the heart. And he says, almost 4 decades, sitting here, every day, hoping that things will change and I'll be able to do this. And Jesus does not entertain all these others. He somewhat goes into this man's life. He understands, he feels the pain that he's going through, and is able to connect with him at that level. And he's been able to do that throughout the Gospels as we see this. And this is what, for me, would be what he's trying to get through, to say to us, when we engage in this theological reflection, embracing the painful and joyful realities of everyday life, when we have this mind of Jesus, it becomes something that actually even helps us to see God in everything that is happening. And not just to expect to see God in a church building, or when we look at the cross and think that connects us, but everything that is there, every little thing, things that may even seem insignificant, but connecting with them and connecting with especially people where they are, through their pains, through their joys, their stories and all, and we are able to see how God has been there and how God is there and continue to be with God's people. And that for me is very profound.
Yeah. And Henry Nouwen sort of concludes his book by saying that the task of Christian leaders is not to make a little contribution to the solutions of the pains and tribulations of the time. But their job is to identify and announce the ways in which Jesus is leading God's people out of slavery.
Yes.
Through the desert. Yep, not into the promised land yet. To a new land of freedom. Our job as Christian leaders is to identify and pronounce the ways that Jesus is leading God's people out of slavery. And it's a tough task.
It is.
And we were chatting before we came on air about Desmond Tutu and how he would write letters to the government and appeal to them to do things God's way.
And I think, this were the kind of things that informed that, all the appeals that he made. And again, there was this perhaps underlying knowledge that I'm writing not as a bishop of the church, but one Christian to another.
To another, yeah.
We may have practiced our Christianity in different ways, but we both are Christians, and when we're sitting in our spaces conversing with God, we connect with God as Christians and as God's children. It doesn't matter from where we come, and that, I think, was one of many things that informed and inspired him to reach out and engage the way he did. And these are some of the things that God calls us to consider and to look into, and that's also the hard task of not wanting to be in control, but to love. There must have been also an element of love. He was on one side being clobbered by these people, but he's still also, on the other hand, reaching out to them and trying to, appeal to reason with them. And in human terms, one could have simply said, no, this is not working. Let's change course. Let's look at other ways. And there were many competing voices at the time that could have simply said, that is the route to follow. And the country could have burned to ashes, but he seemed as Henry puts it, we are living in a world that is loud and busy and all that, and having all these voices coming, to have heard that voice of God that said, let's do things this way. And it goes back to that quote that you said, the task of Christian leaders, future and I think even now, it says it's not to make a little contribution to the solution of the pains and tribulations of their time, but to identify and announce the ways in which Jesus is leading God's people out of slavery through the desert to a new land of freedom. And he says we have an arduous task of responding to people's personal struggles, things that families are going through, conflicts and all. And more so now, as we live under the new normal, everybody's trying to navigate their way, and they're looking at the church as well to say, how do we deal with these things? We don't need academic answers to that. It has to be something that comes through and shows that God is in action. God meets God's people where they are, through their joys and pains, and everything else that they discover. And the leader comes into that space, speaks to those, and then begin to show people that God is present with them throughout all that. And this is something that Henry puts out clearly in one of his books, The Wounded Healer, as he journeys with the folk who have been through all sorts of things, and it's something that is so dynamic that you can use in any situation where people are going through a difficult time. But it's kind of Jesus having immersed himself in that situation, and that's why he was able to show compassion, and God is able to act and do something in that situation. And those that we journey with, as we also become like that, begin to experience and feel and see the love of God in action. It's not an easy task, but when we let go of all these temptations of being relevant, of being powerful, we are able to be vulnerable ourselves, and the people of God are able to identify with us. As they do that, then we are able to reach out to them and let God come into the space, or be seen in this space through us, and people are able to connect even more to God, and begin to see that this is the source of our answers and solutions and everything else that we need.
So, St. Franciscans, thank you again for listening. The trick is to have deep theological reflection, to try and listen to what God is saying. Meshach mentioned all the noise around us, all the conflicting opinions, what everybody's telling you to do, all the different solutions that they're coming up with. What is God telling us to do? And we can only find that by finding the presence of God, which is not an easy task, as Meshach and Henry Nouwen agree. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you on Wednesday night as you tune in to the last of our Lenten course. Thank you, Meshach, for your time. Thank you for your insights.
Thank you.
And to thank you to John Rees too, who's sitting right next to the camera, operating it, being very quiet. Thank you, John Rees.
Thank you so much.
Guys, we'll see you again.
Yeah. Take care.